Good evening, everyone. Rabbi Cohen, my good friend, my colleague, my neighbor, has given me the honor tonight to say a few words of introduction to the Rosh HaYeshiva, or Weinberg Shlita, who happens to be the Rosh Yeshiva of my own alma mater, Yeshiva Ner Yisrael. When we introduce a Rosh Yeshiva, we don't do so merely to tell everyone who the Rosh Yeshiva is. Everyone already knows who the Rosh Yeshiva is. The introduction of a Rosh Yeshiva perhaps is appropriate solely because it just gives us a moment or two to express our hakoras hatov, our gratitude, our respect, and our appreciation for what the Rosh Yeshiva has done for us all the years that we were students of his, and what he's done to inspire all of us to further create indirectly many more students across the face of the land. We're celebrating the Yontif of Shavuos in about a week. And we'll remember that Moshe Rabbeinu, the great teacher, the lawgiver, went up to Mount Sinai, received the law, and passed it on to the Jewish people. When Moshe was first born, and it wasn't clear that he would survive and become the lawgiver, the great teacher of Israel, he had an incident while he was still floating in the Nile River, precariously, not knowing if he was going to survive. And the Chumash tells us what happened to make sure that he would survive. And the verse there tells us that the daughter of Paro happened to be near the Nile at that time. And she saw in the Nile floating that little basket with the baby inside. And the pasuk says, "Vatirena es hayeled." She saw the child. V'hinei hanar boche, and the boy was crying. And she said, "Oh, miyaldei ha'ivrim." She figured out this is a Jewish child who was put there in hiding from the Egyptian taskmasters. So the Gemara wonders why the verse used two different words to describe the boy. First it says, "Vatireu es hayeled." She saw the child. And then it says, "V'hinei hanar boche." The boy was crying. One time yeled, one time nar. So the Balaturim, based on the Medrash, tells us a somewhat different pshat, a different interpretation of the translations of those words. And it wasn't just, the Balaturim tells us, that Paro's daughter saw Moshe Rabbeinu crying in the basket. That's not what she saw. She merely saw Moshe in the basket. Vatareu es hayeled. She saw the little child. Vahine hanar boche. The boy crying was not Moshe crying in the basket. What happened was that Aaron, Moshe's older brother, because he didn't want to leave the little baby alone in the Nile in that precarious position, took up a position a little bit down the bank and was looking to see what will happen with his younger brother. V'hinei hanar Moshe. And Aaron, seeing the position that his younger brother was in, was crying. And when she approached that scene, she saw Moshe in the cradle, and she heard Aaron, her older brother, cry. And then she finally realized what was going on. Oh, this is the scene that I see. V'hinei miyaldei ha'ivrim zeh. This must be a family of the Jewish people. In Egypt, she wasn't too accustomed to hear one Egyptian crying for the sake of another Egyptian. But when I see in a family that an older brother is moved to sit there and wait and to cry hot tears for his younger brother in the position that he's in, oh, this is not from our Egyptian people. This is truly from the Jewish people. These are the characteristics that I've witnessed amongst the Jewish people. Our Rosh Hashiva, in his role as the Rosh Hashiva of Ner Yisrael, is a role of an Aaron, of Aaron the high priest, taking care of the Beis HaMikdash, taking care of the ivory tower of Yeshivas Ner Yisrael, and the advanced Talmudic studies that the Rosh Hashiva involves himself in. But our Rosh Hashiva is unique in that he's also an Aaron. He's also an older brother to all of the Jews beyond the boundaries of Ner Yisrael, Baltimore, Detroit, all the shores in this country. And our Rosh Hashiva is an older brother that hears, that cries, that's sensitive, and knows that he has to come out and touch and reach his brothers across the land. It is an honor for us, especially an honor for Eish HaTorah, and an honor for Alon Tolan, who indeed is also an older brother that cries for his brethren across the city and across the state and across the Midwest. He too is a Nar Bochet, worries about his friends. And just like all of us can shed a tear by saying one little prayer because we hear a news report for our brothers in Eretz Yisrael and our hearts get heavy. That's the mitzvah of the Jewish people. It's an honor for us to have a covet of hearing our great Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Weinberg, covet of Rosh Hashiva.
Good evening. Listening to Gadol, I can get very impressed. I was given an assignment, actually. I was told to discuss about can a rational person believe in the divinity of the Torah. I'm going to address that with your permission, but first, I have always wondered, this goes back really to my bar mitzvah, where I really faced the question of who wrote that Chumash. You know, there's the 5 books of Moses. Somebody wrote it, that's for sure. Now, either a human being wrote it, or God wrote it. One or the other. Again, for certain. Well, let's say a human being wrote it. Who was he? Was he a Jew? Very clearly not. There is no way in the world that anybody could possibly believe that a Jew wrote that book. Because if a Jew would have written that book, he would have found something somewhere nice to be able to say about the Jewish people. That book doesn't have a nice word for anyone who is a Jew. No one. Whether it is Abraham or Isaac or Jacob, they're fooled, or they make mistakes, or they fool people. They are either not smart or they are too smart. Is it talking about the Shvatim, those who formed the tribes of Israel, sold their brother into slavery, full of jealousy? worrisome. Our ancestors slaved and loved their slavery and kept saying, we want to go back and be slaves. Who couldn't be trained for anything. A constant, unceasing, ever-going story of mishaps, of wrongness, of miscalculation, of wrong-headedness, of, if I can say it, God forbid, stupidity, obtuseness. Somewhere, something. I can think of one. They did say to God, Nasa and Ishmael, that's the one nice thing. From the beginning of Genesis to the end of Devarim, one nice thing. But I want to tell you something. You'd think that after the Chumash, at least, they get back into the land. They're writing the story of their history. Somewhere after they got through the land, and they built a country, and they built a Beis Hamikdash, and they had their own kings and institutions, that maybe somebody would slip a kind word in then. Nothing doing. Nothing doing. A constant series of evil and wrongness, lack of gratitude, rebelliousness of the heroes. David, king of Israel, full of wrongness. Solomon, full of wrongness. Somebody, somewhere, sometime, to do something nice. Even the self-haters who've been writing American history lately find somebody they can praise. And mind you, all this written in a time when there was no such thing as I and my people or my country ever did anything wrong. If you read Egyptian history, they never lost a war. If you read Babylonian history, they never lost a war. They are only a category of success, of brilliance. The bad things they leave for the Egyptians to write about them. And if you want to find out something where the Egyptians failed, you've got to read Assyrian history. Because the Egyptian never put down something bad about Egypt or any one of the other countries about themselves. Today, with our vaunted scientific history, you still have a rough time finding the truth about your own country. It's a psychological impossibility, you know that very well, that a Jew would have written the Chumash. Which means that either God wrote it or a vicious anti-Semite wrote the Chumash. One or the other, for sure. But the remarkable thing is that this Hitler, who wrote the Chumash, persuaded the Jews to accept it. That is an even more remarkable miracle. So we've got to face up to the fact that if the Chumash was not written by God, there are some extraordinary miracles that brought it into existence. But if we want to deal with it honestly, we have to face a peculiar fact. When we look at all of history of all the peoples of the world, you will discover a peculiar reality. There is no such thing as a unique story. There is no such thing. If you have a fairy tale told in South America, the equivalent fairy tale is told by the Eskimos. And if you have a story of poor Cinderella, that Cinderella's to be found in India, and that Cinderella's to be found in Africa. The name changes, yes. but the concept is always there. There is no story that doesn't have its counterpart elsewhere in the annals of mankind. There are no uniquenesses except for two. The Jews are unique, and the Greeks are unique. Greece is unique. An outpouring, a wealth of magnificence, of mind, of beauty, that has never been duplicated, was never seen before and never seen since. An intense, incredible richness that flourished for centuries in a way that affected the reality of all mankind in all the centuries that followed. A uniqueness. And the Jew is unique. There are no other uniquenesses in all the annals of mankind. But look at the difference. The Greek was unique for his centuries and passed out of the ken of mankind. The Jew was unique and remains unique, and is unique to this day and was unique forever. And not simply in one aspect, but in every aspect of his existence. You're going to have to explain that away, this incredible uniqueness. And I'm going to deal with periphery uniquenesses first, before we come to deal with the central uniqueness that is the Jew. We have a vaunted educational system here in the United States. How old is it? How old is it? It's less than 2 centuries that we have the concept that tax money, money taken from the population as a whole, should be used to give an education to its children. It's only 200 years old. But do you know something? It's 2,500 years old with us Jews. We Jews have had a tax-supported education system for the past 2,500 years. Isn't it fantastic? The Jew, 2,500 years, and the non-Jew, 2 centuries. 2,500 years. We have understood the absolute necessity of providing by public funds educational institutions for our children, and mankind as a whole took another 2,300 years before they discovered this truth. Do you know there is a very remarkable fact for which I can offer you a theory? I don't know that this is true, but it is a theory that I would offer you for your consideration, and in doing so, meanwhile, bring to your attention an incredible uniqueness that belongs to the Jew. You know, there is an incunablia. Incunablia are all of those books that were printed before the year 1500. And among the Gentiles, among the general population of mankind, incunablia, books printed before the year 1500, are in the tens of thousands. When the printing, the Gutenberg print became into existence, there was an outpouring of publication by the thousands of all kinds of books. By the thousands, tens of thousands, they published books. An outburst of publication. And the Jews published almost nothing. Jewish incunablia consists of several hundred, and we are the people of the book. We did not have a Talmud published till many, many years after printing came into being. And then it was a Gentile firm that published the Talmud and the Rambam. And by the way, they lost money on it. And it always puzzled me. Today, In Israel, they publish proportionally 10 times as much as any other country in the world. Jewish publication is an incredible business. In America, Sfarim, Jewish textbooks, are published by the hundreds of thousands for a very small segment of the population. The number of Jewish bookstores are in the hundreds. There probably are as many Jewish bookstores as there are all other bookstores combined throughout the United States. And yet, when printing began, there were no Jewish books printed. What happened? I have a theory. It makes sense to me. I think what happened was as follows. You see, among the non-Jews, they never read. They had no books. They didn't know how to read. When printing began, it was an opportunity that had never been present before. They suddenly had the chance to have books in their home, to learn how to read. And so they printed by the thousands and thousands. Among Jews, before print, when a book required the enormous investment in time and effort on the part of a scribe of years of writing, they had tens of thousands of books. Every Jewish home had its Siddur. Every Jewish home had its Chumash. Every Jewish home had its Rashi. How many Jewish homes had its Rambam? When they burnt the Talmud in Paris and in Rome and in Naples, they burnt them by the hundreds of wagon loads. More books than the libraries of Paris and Rome possessed. They burnt just tomes of the Talmud in one day by the hundreds of wagon loads. When each one of these volumes had to be written by hand by a scribe who had to spend years in doing so, when they had them in all the Jewish homes, in all Jewish synagogues. They had copies of this incredibly complex and large Shas, the Talmud. And so, when printing came about, there was no great need. They had the books in their homes. It was only gradually as these were worn out that the need to buy new ones, they suddenly discovered it's so much easier and cheaper to get a printed one. But for the first couple of 100 years, they still used their manuscripts, which they had in the hundreds of thousands. Tell me something. Is that unique? Is that unique that one people, of all the peoples of mankind, one, out of all the nations all over the world, one and only one, were universally literate and had books in the hundreds available to all their children for them to live with, to learn, to deal with? Is that unique? Does that uniqueness require some explanation? Does that uniqueness inspire some wonder? How did this come about? This incredible, unbelievable uniqueness that of all the peoples of mankind, one and only one people had universal literacy and the tens of thousands of books laboriously produced with enormous effort to be spread wherever there was a Jewish community. They all had these hundreds and thousands of books. A unique, an unbelievable uniqueness, but a uniqueness that represents another uniqueness that is almost impossible to be able to explain. Mankind has engendered many religions In the hundreds of thousands of religions, you take an encyclopedia of religions, and in very small print, you have literally hundreds of thousands of different religions. And every one of those hundreds of thousands of different religions have one thing in common. And the thing they have in common is, thou shalt not think. Thou shalt not read. Thou shalt not study. If you want to find out, ask the priest. And you know what they said to the priest? They said, don't get too smart. If you want to find out, ask the bishop. There's only one only in all the annals of mankind's religions that says, think, study, know, be learned. It is a religious obligation to study and to learn and to know and to think. And what does it mean when you're told that it is a religious obligation to study and to think? You know what it says? It says, my dear children, when I gave you a religion, it wasn't to be automatons. It was for you to make decisions. It was for you to become responsible. It was for you to take upon yourself the burden of knowing what to do and how to do and why to do, of understanding the sources of your beliefs and your activities. That's what it means when you have an obligation to study and to learn and to think. And what does it mean when they say, oh, don't think? It's because, come on, just take it on blind faith. And here we come to the deepest, the most profound of all the uniquenesses that belongs to the Jew and to the Jew alone. For, and I hesitate to say this because I know how offensive it is to an American, all religions are necessarily false. And I'll tell you why. Because all religions depend on a leap of faith. Without a leap of faith, you cannot be a Christian. Without a leap of faith, you cannot be a Muslim. Without a leap of faith, you cannot be a Buddhist. Without a leap of faith, you cannot be a Mormon. Without a leap of faith, you cannot be a Christian Scientist. You gotta make a leap of faith. You gotta say, I believe. I believe Mary Baker Eddy when she told me that standing on the hill God appeared to her with the key to the scriptures. I gotta believe Joseph Smith when he comes and says that the angel Moroni came into him with the books of Mormon. You gotta believe. Why should you believe? Believe. Let your heart open up and take in the Lamb. You gotta believe. Why should I believe? You gotta believe. Why should I believe? Because your heart tells you. Your heart tells you. Do you know of anything that a human heart won't tell him? Whether to kill or whether to love, whether to destroy or whether to build, everything the human heart tells. A leap of faith, where do you leap when you leap for faith? You leap into the fire or the frying pan, one or the other. But the one thing for sure you don't leap into, and that is the source of life. All religions require a leap of faith, because all religions are built on the teachings of man. You cannot believe man without a leap of faith. When he tells you God has spoken to me and revealed to me his will and his desires and his teachings, you gotta say, but prophet mine, how do we know that God spoke to you? How can we tell? believe your